Happiness is mixed up in our modern world with so many weapons of mass distraction, as I call them. Joy, pleasure, fun, entertainment, elation, excitement. But that's not happiness. That's not genuine happiness. My son died because of a medical error. They made a mistake in a very simple, 5 mistakes in a very simple surgical operation. Before he went into the operating room, I promise you, the highest point of my life. And then 4 hours later, Ali's gone. My new baseline of happiness in life has gone from here to here. And you can make a choice to stay here, or you can make a choice to make it slightly better. And that incremental bit is within the hands of every one of us.
I recently sat down with best-selling author and happiness expert Mo Gaudat, and we talked a lot about how we can potentially live happier lives. Mo tragically lost his son, whose name was Ali, in 2014. And since then, he's made it his mission to try and understand and research around how happiness works and to try and make 1 billion people happier. And this struggle to find happiness in our day-to-day is something that I've struggled with a lot. We inevitably end up chasing things like money and fame and status and success and prestige, kind of implicitly thinking that those things are going to make us happier. But as everyone says, eventually you realize that actually that's not necessarily, it's not really the path to true happiness and fulfillment. In this video, we're going to be exploring some of the different ways that we can actually become happier using evidence from science and from Mo's experience and from psychology. And we're going to talk about firstly the idea that happiness is a choice. Secondly, we're going to talk about why that's a particularly difficult idea for a lot of us to accept. And then finally, we're going to talk about 5 practical ways that we can apply right now to tangibly increase our own happiness levels. Let's get into it. Now, when I first heard this idea that happiness is a choice, part of me was like, okay, yeah, that kind of makes sense. But another part of me was like, ugh, it feels a bit wrong to say that happiness is a choice, because what about people who've had child abuse? What about people in poverty? What about people whose life circumstances means that they can't possibly be happy? What's going on there? And I posed this question to Mo.
Absolute happiness is not a choice. Nobody's ever always happy. Of course, if you have chronic pain, if you have been subjected to abuse, if you've lost someone that you love, it's not the same ease of finding happiness that then, like, if you wanted to buy a sandwich and your place was closed, you know, your favorite, or they didn't have your favorite sandwich. Some of us feel unhappy about that, and it's absolutely a choice not to, right? It's not comparable to I've been abused. The question is, in relative terms, losing my child could make me miserable, and nobody would blame me for that. And you can make a choice to stay here, or you can make a choice to make it slightly better, and slightly better, and slightly better. Yeah, I may never return back to that high point. I may never return back to a place of absolute happiness, of, you know, remembering my son and not missing him. But I have the choice to make that incremental bit. And that incremental bit is within the hands of every one of us.
Many of us don't like to accept the idea that happiness is a choice. And there's sort of 2 main reasons, if we look at the psychology, literature, and research around this, 2 main reasons why we don't like this idea. The first one is the idea of the negativity bias. The way our brains have evolved over time, it's to be very aware of any threat to our happiness or to our survival or to our status in the group. And so when life is going swimmingly, the brain is like, all right, cool, I'm going to ignore all of that kind of stuff, and I'm going to be constantly vigilant for any kind of threat to my potential safety. But what that means is that we have this bias towards negativity, and we're way more likely to pay attention to negative events than to positive ones, because obviously that was useful for our survival. And that means that we're way more prone to thinking that, like, oh, negative external events mean that I can't possibly be happy, therefore happiness is not a choice, it's outside of my control.
Most of us live our entire life on solid ground. Most of us never ever see an earthquake, right? Ever, unless it's in the news. The baseline of life is okay.
Yeah.
And then the negatives just happen. You know, there are dips out of okay and then back to the baseline.
And the second reason why we struggle to accept this idea is the idea of locuses of control. Now, this is a thing within the world of psychology where some people have an internal locus of control and other people tend to have an external locus of control. And usually what that means is if you have an external locus of control, you sort of feel like your life is ruled by the external world. Like, external circumstances dictate how happy you are personally and what you're able to do. And to an extent, that's true for everyone. But then there are some people that have more of an internal locus of control where they feel like they are in control of their own destiny and in control of decisions that can profoundly influence the impact of their lives. And generally it's the people that have been raised with this idea of an external locus of control who tend to think, oh my God, happiness can't possibly be a choice because the government, because of this, because recession, because of all these other different external circumstances. Let's now talk about 5 practical ways to become happier. And the first one is understanding the happiness equation. Now, this is from Mo's first book called Solve for Happy, which is really good. I listened to it on Audible, it's absolutely sick. But essentially the idea there is that happiness equals reality minus expectations. Now, based on this equation, conclusion, we can see that there's not a lot we can do to influence reality, which is often the thing that we try to do. But if we want to become happier, we can lower our expectations. And the lower our expectations are, the more likely we are to be surprised by events and therefore be happier as a result of them. But one of the things we talked about in the interview was like, does this mean that we should all just become super pessimistic? Does this mean that, hey, if you want to be happier, you should just lower your expectations to the floor, because then everything's going to surprise you and then everything's hunky-dory and life is all good?
If your target in life is to be happy,
yeah,
okay, honestly, then yeah, lower expectations will make you happier. I know many friends in my life that decided that they've had enough of fast-paced lives. They went and lived in the Dominican Republic, and the only thing that would make them unhappy on a day is that there is not enough wind to kite surf. Their expectations are very low. They don't expect a Ferrari. They don't expect to be able to live in a big city. They don't want to go to museums. Their expectations are low. So if your target is happiness, yeah, that's the way to go. Okay. If your target is success and impact on life, however, you need to go to the opposite way.
Okay.
And the opposite way is I need ambition. So when I wrote Solve for Happy at the beginning, I wrote it with the mission of 10 million happy.
Yeah.
And then 10 million happy happened very quickly, and my team got together and said, maybe we should set a bigger target. So we didn't set 11, we didn't set 100 million, we set 1 billion happy. 1 billion happy is a crazy target to have. How many people in the world have reached 1 billion people, right? But it's a nice, ambitious target to aspire to. So when I wake up in the morning, year one, when we've achieved another 10 million or so, I don't tell myself that's it, we've achieved, we're done.
Yeah.
I say to myself, there is still a way to go, there is still more to do. Okay, but now, so you're stuck between those two extents, if you want. One that says have no expectation at all and you'll be happy, and the other says have extremely high expectations and you'll be successful. What's the problem with the modern world is that we believed in this and not that. The problem with the modern world is when you're growing up, I'm sure, I don't know your mom, but your mom told you success is more important than happiness. Go thrive in life.
Or that success leads to happiness.
Or that success leads to happiness, right? So we believed that. While it's not true. I mean, how often do you meet someone who's successful and rich and famous and swimming in money and everyone's attracted to them and paparazzis are all around them and they're miserable? Okay, success doesn't always lead to happiness. Now, between those two, there is a midpoint, like everything in life, which is I need a realistic expectation. A realistic expectation is not lowered than how it should be, and it's not higher than how it should be. I need an ambition that is higher than the realistic expectation, and I need a contentment that sometimes even my realistic expectation might be missed. Okay, and in that case, while I aim for a realistic expectation and a high ambition, I'm getting the best of both worlds. I'm trying to be successful, and at the same time, I'm contented as I go through that path when life misses my expectations sometimes.
Ooh. And what I took away from this is that there's always this trade-off between the happiness that we're experiencing in the here and now, because our expectations are low, and this striving to do better and like achieve more things and stuff. And the way that I figured out to maybe reconcile these two, although it's something I still struggle with, is the idea that I can be totally content with my current lot in life and feel like, my expectations are super low. If I'm releasing a video, I have zero expectations of how it performs. If I'm trying a new thing, I have zero expectations that it's going to succeed, and I can just focus on enjoying myself in the moment. But at the same time, there is a middle way. At the same time, I can still be striving for something and having goals, just trying my best not to tie my ego and not be so attached to the outcome that it causes me to then become unhappier. Tip number 2 is the look down principle.
Sadly, we always look up. We say, I have a Mercedes and he has a Ferrari, or I am in the bus and he's in his Mercedes, or I'm walking and he's in the bus, or I'm not able to walk and he's walking. And you can always go down.
Now, the idea here is that we're often so accustomed to looking up. It's like, I compare myself to the person above me in the hierarchy or whatever. I compare myself to bigger YouTubers. Like, I've got 3 million subscribers, but like Marcus Brownlee has 15 million subscribers. Isn't he living the dream? And this tendency to look up generally makes us focus on the gap between where we are now and that person that we aspire to be like. And when we focus on the gap, it causes us generally to become less happy. Whereas Mo's advice here is that actually it's really helpful for our happiness if we instead, quote, look down. And this doesn't mean look down on people in like a mean way, but this means appreciating that where we are compared to where we were before, measuring the gain rather than the gap.
There was a point around a year after he left us where I realized something that completely flipped my view of everything, which was, yes, Ali died, but Ali also lived. And he comes into our life and he enriches our life so much for 21 and a half years. And then he leaves, and the typical human mind will say, how could life take my son? But the typical human mind would forget, how could life have given me my son, right? And it's so interesting when you realize that honestly, if I was given a choice, with all the pain I felt when he left us, if I would avoid the pain by not having him, absolutely not. I'll take the pain 10 times.
Tip number 3 that I got from the interview is the rule of 9 positive things. And this is a way of helping overcome our brain's negativity bias. And basically the idea here is that whenever you're upset about something, try and find 9 positive things about the situation.
Your brain is capable of anything. But if you leave it uncontrolled, its tendency, its instinct is to look for what's wrong. If you take charge, you know, that little voice in your head, I basically say it's like your computer, it's like your device. You can tell it what to do and it will do it. And once you start to take charge, that machine can be instructed to look for what's right. I have this very simple exercise when my brain tells me something wrong about anything. Okay? I ask for 9 other good things about the situation.
All right, tip number 4 is that happiness is different from joy and pleasure. A little bit of this is somewhat semantic, but the way Mo defines happiness and the way he talks about it in his books, that little voice in your head and also Soul for Happy, is the idea that happiness is not like short-term hedonism. Happiness is not the joy you get from playing video games or hanging out with friends. Happiness is that general level of contentment that you have with life as a whole. And that means that we need to be aware that when we're investing our time, energy, money, effort into these short-term hedonistic things, they might give us those little spikes of, like, I don't know, hedonism or dopamine or whatever in the moment, but they're unlikely to contribute to our long-term happiness. And therefore, investing in things that we know contribute to our happiness, like health and relationships and purpose and having a fulfilling career and having autonomy in our jobs, these things may not give us that instant dopamine hit right now, but they do tend to lead to longer-term happiness and fulfillment. And finally, tip number 5 that I really took away from reading Mo's books and from having the conversation is the idea of journey before destination. And I often think about this quote because it really encourages us to focus on the present moment rather than on striving for some kind of external metric of success or anything like that. Really, a lot of times we can act as if life is this dress rehearsal for some big event, or I will be happy when I achieve that particular milestone. I will be happy once I graduate med school and become a doctor, because being a doctor is going to be way more fun. I'm going to be way happier. Actually, it's usually not the case. Usually happiness is found in the present moment. And I was listening to a great podcast episode between Lewis Hose and Alex Hormozi, where they were talking about the idea that when you're 20, you want to be a millionaire, but when you're a millionaire, you wish that you were 20. And so it's like, why are we striving for all these things, knowing that when we get there, we would absolutely trade all of it to be back in the present moment so that we could enjoy ourselves and really appreciate that present moment a little bit more. Now, if you're interested in happiness, I would highly recommend reading Mo's first book, Soul for Happy, which talks in more detail about the happiness equation and how it came about, but also his new book, That Little Voice in Your Head, which is absolutely sick as well. And I've actually listened to both of these books on Audible, who are very kindly sponsoring this video. Audible is probably hands down my favorite sponsor of all time to work with, because I've been using Audible basically every day of my life since 2017. I looked at my stats. I've clocked in about 1.5 months worth of non-stop listening over the last 5 years. Basically, I always have a non-fiction book and a fiction book that I'm listening to concurrently. Right now, the fiction book I'm re-listening to is Words of Radiance, which is book 2 of the Stormlight Archive by Brandon Sanderson. Freaking incredible series of fantasy books. Completely changed my life when I discovered Brandon Sanderson. 100% recommended to everyone. Every single person I've ever recommended the audiobook for The Way of Kings, which is the first book in the Stormlight Archive series, has messaged me and been like, oh my god, this is freaking amazing. So 100% would recommend that. But also I usually have a non-fiction self-helpy type audiobook on the go as well. Like I said, I listened to Mo's first book, Soul for Happy, on Audible, and it was absolutely sick, and it just really taught me a lot about happiness as well. And he's such a great narrator, and like the introduction to that book where he talks about how his son died just like genuinely brought me to tears, and I couldn't recommend it highly enough. If you want to sign up to Audible, you can head over to audible.com/Ali Abdaal, or you can text Ali Abdaal to 500 500, and that will give you a completely free 30-day trial where you can get an audiobook of your choice, again, completely for free. So if you want to listen to Soul for Happy or this new book, That Little Voice in Your Head, you can absolutely do that within the free trial. And I've been saying in videos for the last 5 years that if I could choose to have one subscription of any kind in the world, it would be Audible. I think it is hands down the single most valuable, the highest return on investment kind of subscription purchase that I've ever made. So 100% recommend Audible. Thank you so much for sponsoring this video. And thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed this, you're going to absolutely love the full in-depth conversation I had with Mo on my Deep Dive podcast. That will be there over on the Deep Dive YouTube channel, and you can also find it on any podcast platform of your choice. People have said that that is one of the best podcast episodes of all time that they've ever listened to, and I think it's certainly one of the podcast episodes that's had the biggest impact on my life. So check that out over there. Thank you so much for watching. Do hit the subscribe button if you're not already, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.